Putin's government and the Russian Duma then imposed in 2013 the ban on sodomy, or sometimes it is called the ban on gay propaganda, which basically prohibits in Russia since 2013 any public expression of queerness, especially in institutions, on the basis that it can deprave children. And then, in 2014, the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg was a location of Manifesta 10. Manifesta is a biennial of European art that was established for the first time in 1996. The first edition was in Rotterdam. And every 2 years, they have an edition of Manifesta in a different city in Europe. And in 2014, St. Petersburg got Manifesta. To get Manifesta, you have to pay money to the foundation that runs Manifesta. And 2014, this is a year when Crimea was annexed by Russia, on the one hand. On the other hand, in 2013, they introduced the prohibition on gay propaganda in Russia in general, in the whole country. And 2014, Manifesta decides to have an exhibition in St. Hermitage Museum. And it was an enormous outcry in the art world in Europe at the time that the Manifesta shouldn't be organized in St. Petersburg in Russia because of Russia's nasty behavior politically in Crimea and because of the homophobic legislation. The curator of the museum of this edition, Manifesta 10, was Kasper König, one of the famous curators, painting-related curators from the 80s. And they've done something incredible, actually. It wasn't a queer exhibition, but many of the major artists that were presented at Manifesta 10 were queer artists. And they didn't organize one exhibition, they interspersed the queer artworks by contemporary art, and they put it in the next to artworks that are already in the collection in the Winter Palace of Hermitage. So it wasn't like one exhibition, but paintings, photographs, installations were put into the permanent display of Hermitage. And many of these artworks were queer artworks, like globally well-known artists like Nicolai Eisman. It is so a contemporary lesbian American painter. Marlene Dumas, great man, her series of great homosexual men. This is the Russian edition of this work. Mamyshev Monroe and his photographs and his paintings. And you have to remember that in the gay propaganda law that they introduced in Russia in 2013, they don't really talk about homosexuality. They talk about genderism, they talk about sodomy, they talk about transgenderism. So transgenderism is definitely prohibited to propagate in Russia since 2013. And suddenly, in the Hermitage, in the National Museum in St. Petersburg, you have Manifesta 10 with these major queer artists that are put on display. So this is one of the mysteries of queer exhibitions for me. First of all, how it was possible to do it. Because indeed the homosexual propaganda law in Russia, it works. People get, art gets censored, museums get penalty to pay for putting this kind of display. And suddenly in the major institution in this country, it was possible to have this kind of artworks 1 year after the introduction of this law. Wolfgang Tillmans, series of gay photographs. Everything was there, not in one room, but next to some historical art pieces in the collection of Hermitage. And Kasper König, who is a curator who has nothing to do with identity politics or any progressive curatorial activism, he was the curator of the show. And as I mentioned, they encountered a lot of opposition and a lot of criticism before staging Manifesta 10 in St. Petersburg, arguing that it should never be organized in St. Petersburg or in Russia at the time. So I guess that the curators, they have to find some kind of excuse to do it at this particular time. And that is why they included so many queer art pieces as a kind of gesture to justify the presence of the Manifesta 10 in St. Petersburg in 2014. And it goes basically to the core of the director of the Hermitage, Mikhail Piotrowski, I don't think that he's especially queer-friendly or for this kind of project, but his idea of a museum, he doesn't speak about a critical museum or something like this on this kind of level, or museum for democratic art, for democracy, but he speaks about preserving bridges and cultural connection. Is very important today, especially because the situation is not all conducive to this. So I think that they agreed to have these queer masterpieces on display during Manifesta 10 because of the curatorial and museological concept of making bridges at a moment where politically bridges are disappearing. And then one of the curators of the public program of Manifesta 10, Joanna Warszaw, who is a Polish curator, by the way, mentioned the projects will obviously not represent the position of the Russian government. The projects will obviously not represent the position of the Russian government. So you see, my point is that when you have the support of the bodies, of the directors, of the national museums, even in a place like Russia, everything is possible. Everything is possible.
I think probably we better call this
yes.
Thank you so much, Pawel. And we've learned so much. And actually, I knew about this exhibition, but I didn't know it had that content and that agenda. I think I would have made even more effort to go and see it if I'd known it was quite so
I have the catalogs and I'm teaching a lot about this Manifesta 10 because it's so unique.
Yes.
Politically,
yes. I wanted to say that obviously the Somerset House had its Hermitage extension, and for the 10 or 15 years before this moment, Piotrowski had been making so many links, but also institutional links and exchanges with Europe. And our Hermitage Museum was really transposed to the Amsterdam Hermitage attachment, or whatever it's called. It's got a very fantastic restaurant people go on about. But I think, which is of course, I think that the political relationships, and there's a Hermitage Society here in London, I think the political relationships Piotrowski, as really a cultural ambassador for his nation, has made over the last 10 years, was such that it was important for him to make a gesture on behalf of not only his branches everywhere, but the curatorial respect he had and his own kind of mobility. And I think his institution is big enough, and remember that Putin is from St. Petersburg, for him to have had an amazing leeway. So the kind of art politics of all this even transcends the issue. The way it's disguised, I think, is very interesting.
But this is still quite amazing that Mamyshev Monroe, who is such a famous Russian artist, was actually featured in Hermitage at the time, just after the introduction of this anti-transgender legislation.
Absolutely. So Marilyn Monroe was a pet who has been flitting around all sorts of things. Anyway, thank you again to Pawel.
Thank you for coming and sacrificing